to take questions, hear responses. And again, I am interested in responses. It doesn't need to be a question. It can be a reaction. Yes?
Can I ask a question real quick, or sort of a request? As you are saying the things that you want to say, can you please make sure to try to project as much as you can? The same's going to go for you, Jody. People can hear in the back as long as everybody projects, but if you don't, it won't work as well. So speak up, Andrew.
Absolutely, Joyce. So in this presentation, visual rhetoric is such a cool aspect to look at, and I'm curious how to approach in scholarship visual rhetoric in a measured way, in a way that you could produce to others and say, well, this is what I found. How did you approach that?
Okay, I don't like that question. Can we move on?
Sure.
No, say that again in terms of with the visual components, how I decided what I was going to show with, or I want to make sure that I'm understanding your question.
Sure. In which ways did you approach the visual aspects of your work and measure it, or like qualify it?
I'm still not.
If someone
Qualify it how, I mean, I can talk about how I designed and how I chose, bringing together all these components.
Yes.
But that's what you're talking about. I think through figuring, I mean, it depends with the particular segment of work, and they're kind of different what I'm trying. First and foremost, with each of these pieces of video scholarship, I tried to push myself conceptually and technically with what I was trying to do. So there was a lot of experimentation and play in that way. For instance, with the last pieces where I have the frames going on, I knew very much that I think one of the things in scholarship that gets hidden or reduced is the part of the writer, right? We exist on the page as words or as a voice. I wanted to make sure that you never forgot there is a live embodied person who is engaged with these things. And so using that image of myself, particularly the one that was over here and it was kind of faint, I wanted to show all of the things that go into my producing, my doing the research. So it's hobbies, it's drinking wine, it's, looking, things like that. So in that case, I really knew that I wanted to foreground the fleshiness of the composer so that you would never lose sight of that. I made sure that I was a little bit more reduced in opacity so that people would be looking at this but never get away from the fact that I am part of this. Again, it's that merging of then and now, here and there, living in the dead. So that was one way that I thought about doing it. Another thing in terms of, and I will say, and we've been talking about this throughout my visit here, is how do people get credit for the immense amount of work this is, just in terms of showing these things, taping them. The picture with the frames on the tree and the chair took me a while to come up with, a while to shoot, but once it's all edited together, I can look at, maybe 8 hours to 2 weeks of work for 1 minute of video, right? How do we count this if somebody's just looking at the content and what the argument is? So I mean, that becomes another thing that I'm thinking about in terms of doing this kind of work, is pushing the boundary of what scholarship can look like. But by the same token, and in my book I'll do more of this because I'll have inner chapters that are called Process and Text Specs, where I unpack. You'll watch a chapter and you'll also see kind of the behind the scenes work. So that becomes another issue in terms of, I knew I wanted 3 frames going at that point. So a lot of it depends on what piece I'm working at, what I've done before, and where I think I want to go and how challenging I want to be to the reader. The one in particular with the 3 frames, and I like to tell this story because I can, and it's okay, I have a very good friend and colleague at work who can't even watch it. I mean, she hates what I'm doing because it so decenters her. So with the 3 frames, which is part of the point, where do you look, right? And people say it's overwhelming, there's too much going on. I don't know what to listen to, what to look at, and I think that that's part of the point, that scholarship shouldn't be something that you get in one sitting. It's something that you go back to and you know differently. So a lot of that kind of informs the visual, auditory. The one thing that I haven't worked in here that I would like to do if I could do it well, is the olfactory. You know, I mean, that's something that's very much missing from the scholarship, but as I engage with these artifacts, they smell. I mean, I bought a huge lot of old films that have vinegar syndrome. So that's something that you're missing. And so it becomes one of those things that, okay, I've gotten the movement, the image, the sound, but how do I work in other things, the textural? How do I work in the olfactory? So that's where I'm seeing the pushing, but then again, how far do I push people before, right? It becomes a kind of synesthesia where I'm on the floor rolling around because I don't know how to process all this information. Right? So I don't know if that answered it, but again, you know, it depends on those particular specifics. And I was doing something with my works cited, that I was working out the technique for that. And what I really want to do is comics, right, where I am cutting out all of, because I've got this large collection of people I don't know, and I thought, what if they're all voicing, through a comic book form, the works cited page? And so as I'm taping myself as the process, figuring this out and showing people, as somebody new to comic life, which is what I was using, how I'm figuring it out. And I started mushing stuff together, just getting that kind of felt sense of what looks good. And all of a sudden, it no longer looked like a comic book, it looked like a merged frame, those collage frames. And I thought, and as I'm going through it, I'm like, what if I get, you know what? I like that, and that makes sense in terms of the way that family photos are oftentimes collaged. So things will happen in that way where I'll think, visually I like it, but then I realize conceptually it makes more sense than what I was planning to do before. Right? Because I don't want people thinking I'm mocking, so I didn't want that these people are comic book characters, but to do something that, again, made us think differently about what a works cited page can look like and what it can do.
Yes.
Have you had the need to justify the value of your work because it's multimodal in nature, like as opposed to traditional scholarship? And like, what does that look like?
Am I breathing air? Yes, absolutely. I've been doing this, not this, but multimodal work, or my students have rather, since 1997, right? As of 2005, when I went on the job market, some people said, nobody will ever hire you, right? So it has been, but I knew that I was prepared for that. A lot of what helped me are kind of issues or statements from the field saying this is what we need to do. And I could say, well, I've been doing it and researching this and interviewing people about it. So that was good, but still, and I think there is a huge theory-practice split where we say, yeah, we want multimodality, right? But not that much, not in that way, right? Or do it just a little bit, like only be, and I think if I ever write another book or do a memoir, it's going to be called, can you please be a little bit less multimodal? The career trajectory of Jody Shipka. And so I think that becomes where even when people are going, the job ads more and more, oh yeah, multimodality. And what I'm hearing from people out in the field is that people have very different ideas of what that looks like and how that impacts the classroom. But more so what I'm interested in this point is how does it impact our scholarship? And I will say, and I think part of this is the problems or limitations with our venues for publishing, is we have this, which I've done, and we have this. Now look at, they're both the same, they're both flat, they both lack the textural, the olfactory. So I'm alleging that what I see my students doing, the kinds of argumentation that they are making, the performances that they are staging, the kind of research they're able to enact, and the way they're able to make me think about knowledge production far surpasses much of what I see in the field by scholars. And I think part of this is because of our limited venues. How does one experience a board game? How does one get that out? How does one publish that? And I think that that's very much where we're stuck now. But in terms of your question, yeah, it's been a lot of explaining, a lot of trying to link what I'm doing to more traditional goals, right? And when I first started doing this, people were like, that's so creative. All right, this is not the kind of creative you want to be, right? It's so, just not rigorous. It's just so not what we're supposed to be doing. And people would say, where's the writing? And I'm like, are we looking at the same thing? The writing is all over these artifacts that my students were producing. But I think people, what it suggested to me is they were thinking of writing in a very, very narrow way that looks a certain way, that sounds a certain way. And what they were basically perpetuating is a view that the world isn't filled with writing, and we know that it is. It's on our shirts, it's on our products, it's all around us. So to say where's the writing, I can say right here and here and here, but it's asking the people who might have issues with this to define for me what they find important. And how does what you're doing serve these goals? I can talk about what the multimodality is doing, but can you talk to me about how more traditional methods are serving the goals of learning, whatever it happens to be that people privilege in that classroom space? For me, it's about experimentation, it's about seeing what's happening, it's about reflective choices. And I'm not saying that that's exclusive to multimodality. I know a lot of people can do it very irresponsibly and non-reflectively, where it does seem fun. But again, I think it's a balance. Bad pedagogy is bad pedagogy, regardless of what you're doing. Good pedagogy is a different set of criteria. So yes, I've had to defend it, and I anticipate I'm going to have to defend this too. But I'll defend it with tenure this time, as opposed to the first time. But and all kidding aside, it does hurt to be that person who feels like a freak show. And over time, it's been better. And I think the rise of new media certainly made this other work, the object work, possible. Because with new media, we are now talking about, or we have been talking about, different modes of production, different kind of resources coming into play. But again, my work has always been, why is the choice this or the screen? What about all of the other things that are made from different modes and that can encourage different kinds of learning, being, and communicating? That's what people don't like. They want me to be this multimodal, right? Or not all people, but some. Yes?
You sort of alluded to this with your first research, and you sort of tracked down your subjects, and then you found not the subject, but the people in the photos, and you found that they were in large part all dead, and that was very devastating in a way. You've shown us many of the images you've shown us are very old, and most of the people in them will be dead, and it seems like in some way like process sort of like the intensity or the grief of that is one reason why you're recontextualizing and remediating some of these images just to towards the dead and not in the form, as you said. Is it still though sometimes an ongoing struggle to sometimes like sort of maybe be overwhelmed with some of these objects, or like sort of frustration understanding their significance as they once was conceived?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very demanding in ways that oftentimes we don't talk about as scholarly folks, right? Because it's about how I feel, how my body feels working with these things. So yes, it's very, I mean, even then, and I think it's past my bedtime, folks, you have to understand, like if you would have seen me at 4 in the morning, I'm on fire, and and here even, thinking about Dorothy and Fred's story, when I got those 6 boxes, the first thing I saw was how the story ended. She died of cancer in 1981, when I graduated from high school and thought my whole life was ahead of me and I was invincible. And then the next thing I saw was this love letter that represents the beginning of this romance. And so it was, and it's still sometimes difficult looking at that, and I think thinking about even, for me, Leon just died, the man who helped me with this. Leon's is gone. That bar has been torn down and it's something else. So, for me it becomes emotional in that way. Physically it can be very taxing just because, as I allude to a little bit in here, the materials are so fragile. Also, when I'm reading the bigger things or watching the videos or whatever, it becomes a different way of doing research in terms of the impact on my body. And certainly, Jessica Helfand, who is a scholar primarily of scrapbooks, had said you spend any amount of time with these scrapbooks, you begin to fall in love with the people. And whether or not she's being hyperbolic, I do feel a kind of attachment to them or a responsibility for them, to understand them, to share them with other people in a way that's respectful. So I think all of that, and I like to tell a story, I was cutting one of these videos and putting it together during office hours, and I know never to work on my own work when students are coming, because it's hard for me to get out of the headspace of my own work, and I get frustrated very easily. So I'm cutting together, I think it was the one about the trip 49 years, 849 miles. which I think I could subtitle, "Who the fuck cares, we're all gonna die and people are gonna buy our shit for real cheap," right? But I'm cutting this thing, and students are coming in and they're like, "Professor Shipka, guess what, I got this great idea." And it was really hard, like I saw myself outside my body going, do you get it? It doesn't matter. Life is so short, we're gonna die. Strangers are gonna buy your shit, it's gonna otherwise be thrown out. And it was like, whoa, okay, wait. No, don't share that with the students. Right? So I think, again, I have to switch it up between doing this work and doing other things because it is that click, click, click. It's not that long. These people are gone. And I think, thinking about the proximity of, Leon, I missed my chance to go back and get a little more information. So you are very aware of the temporal nature and the fleeting nature of things. And I think we should be more cognizant of that in other types of research that we do, or to think about that. Yes?
I was very interested in that trip, the way you took it and you kept the notes like
Yeah.
Dorothy, is that her
Yeah.
done? Where do you see that going? Do you I mean, it was titled, it looked like, for those not born yet.
Yes, yes.
So where do you see that going? Can you do something else with it where we put it somewhere so that somebody else will take that trip too?
I could put it somewhere, whether or not people would be able to play it after we're dead, becomes another issue, and I think that's something scary about the media forms that, my garage is filled not only with tons of, and that's another thing, I fear that my boyfriend and I will both die, somebody will go into our house, right, and think these are my relatives, and I want to put big disclaimers, like, I don't know them at all, it's research, right, which research also keeps me from being a hoarder, right, because I'm buying this stuff in order to research it, as we're going to have to buy a bigger and bigger house, but part of it is, we find this stuff, and then we are at the mercy of having things to play it on, which fortunately we've got enough slide projectors, 8mm, 16mm, but I worry now about if I've got this on, something like this, and we do away with USBs, are people ever going to be able to access it? So it could be that nobody finds this. I'm not going to any great lengths to do it. I mean, I think what was interesting about that trip is, and I can't show you, well, I can't publish part of it because it would be copyrighted. There's one part where I've got the news on. And people were talking about what was going on, and then dude looks like a lady comes on, and my boyfriend starts singing along with it, and I'm thinking, wow, I really want that part where he's singing, but copyright, right? So, again with that, in terms of where it could go, I think I've got 10 travel diaries, so if we ever have money and can travel internationally, we'd like to follow more of those trips and just kind of see what, at the time we made that trip to St. Louis, I was about 6 months old and my boyfriend was 4 months from being born. So it was interesting to see, are the roads still there? And even going into places, because it's always that disclaimer, like, this is gonna sound weird. Like when we went to Maine, and going with all my scrapbooks is like proof that I'm not a nut job. And I'm like, this is gonna sound weird, but I've got these records of this couple that stayed here in 1967, and their receipts and everything. So the people at the inn were really, really interested. The inn is extremely, these people had money, and they like to drink, so I'm gathering. I think that's the blurry, fuzzy conversation part. But it was nice in that case, the people at the inn were really interested to see. And I said, could you show me the room? And Dorothy bought a pair of green tennis shoes. And she thought to write about this. She kept track of her expenditures. Well, I'll be darned if in her scrapbook she didn't have a picture of the green tennis shoes. And so I was asking, is the shop still here? Is their room still here? And that end had been remodeled and demolished. So I couldn't get to where they stood, but I was able to go to that place. And I guess the place where you have dinner and drinks has remained unchanged for almost 50 years. So people were like, that looks exactly the same, we'll show you that. So.
But what it also makes me think of is, Shakespeare has said something like, as long as these words last, and they give life to thee. It reminds me of that idea, so as long as that is there, that trip will remain. You took their trip, somebody else could take your trip. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's,
again, if they could
it's very nice.
access it, if it ended up, I mean, I think this begs the question, with those first Nancy and Carl and the Leon thing, those first negatives that cost me $2. I mean, in the content's brilliant when we're talking about the military stuff. Really good content. I had got a huge big pile because at a point I was like, well, how much for this? How much for this? And the guy's finally like, just make a pile and we'll bargain for it later. And I didn't know what his prices were going to be. I knew that each of these negatives were like $1 a box. But as I started compiling or piling up more things, I had left an enlarger there that I really wanted, but I thought, you know, it's going to be too expensive. I went on with my day. I had appointments, and then my friend, I sent her back, and I said, can you go back and knock on that door and just offer him money for the enlarger? Because the box lot was so cheap, I figured they would just throw it in. So she went back, and this is where it really horrifies me, the choices that people make. And she said, we were here earlier and we bought a bunch of stuff, we want to pay for or we want to buy the enlarger. And he said, and the woman said, my husband took everything that was left to the dump. It turns out the person I bought the negatives from was the grandson of Carl, the man that was depicted here. So, he would have thrown those all out in case somebody else got it. And then I think what people do, they split up the collection, which horrifies me. You know, $5 a picture, instant relatives, you know, and I'm committed to keeping these collections together, honoring them in that way. But it is scary to think about that this is a bunch of stuff that would conceivably go to the dust or to the dump or be split apart even further than it's been split apart already. Yes.
This is more, I think, a logistics question, but you mentioned that it was Carl's grandson you bought these from. Did you have to get permissions from the descendants if you couldn't find? Oh, I mean, obviously, if you couldn't find them, but was there any concern with that?
I didn't, from what I learned, it doesn't sound like it was a great relationship, so again, question. So I didn't want to go back to him for more information because here he's dumping all this stuff. When I met with the woman who said they're all dead, you know, and what had happened when I went into Leon's, and he's right down the street from where I live, but I live in a very small town mentality, you're either in or out. And it's kind of like stepping back to the 1950s anyways. And so I'd never been in this place, but I thought the sign was really cool and retro, so I'd taken the picture. But when I walked in, I mean, it was very clear I was not a regular. So the waitress was like, you know, help you? And I said, once again, hi, I'm Jody Shipka, this is going to sound really weird. And I said, yeah, I'm just wondering, did this used to be a house? And she's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, this is going to sound weird, but I ended up buying all these negatives, and I brought in the letter from, you know, Carl, or from Howard for proof. And I said, I bought this stuff, and there's this letter addressed to this address, and I'm just wondering if this used to be a house. I'm just trying to, and she goes, what are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, it's going to sound weird, but, you know, and I repeated it, and she's like, I never played the lotto, but you know what, I'm playing this address, and this is ridiculous, and I'm like, and she goes, 2 weeks ago, 2 women are sitting in here going, when we lived here, the fireplace was here, and this, and I'm like, shit, they're alive. I mean, it was one of those things where I really didn't know. Like, so then, you know, I'm like, she's like, oh, they were, and I said, okay, and then she let me talk to Ethel, Leon's wife, who died, I think, 2 weeks after Leon did. And Leon wasn't in at the time, and I explained to her what was going on, and she said, well, come back and see Leon. You know, he would know who this woman is and stuff like that. So then, I mean, it was the summer of my great hope, where, you know, as I sat with Leon, I said, when are these women going to come back in? He goes, well, you know, you never know. They come in every now and then. And it was this woman and her daughter who would come in. And I said, you know, Leon, please, if they feel comfortable, please, you know, here's my phone number. Here's pictures as proof, right? Well, the daughter had researched me through UMBC to figure out who I was before they agreed to this meeting. So we met at Leon's. And of course, that was a freaky thing, because of course I'm like, oh my God, I don't know you at all, but I think I do, because I looked at all your family memories, right? So it's that weird, I love you, you don't know who I am, you know? And at that moment, you know, the daughter did ask, how did you get these? Which there is that creepy moment, right? And I've had to come to terms. On the one hand, legally, I own that property that property was purchased. Certainly for me and other people who work with found artifacts, I buy cameras with film in it, so I developed that. And if anybody wanted the stuff back, you know, and I had asked these women, I said, do you want this? And they said no, they wanted copies of the pictures with that woman's husband, and you know, I've really kind of not used their stuff a whole lot. I don't show, even though I have pictures from that event, I will not show people what the woman who said all dead looks like now, just in terms of preserving and honoring, you know, their privacy. I don't give out really people's last names and stuff like that.
So you talk a lot about using other people's families' stuff, and so you said it's research, not create few people. What's the difference? Like, my mother does a lot of archiving stuff with family history, so what do you think the composing difference is between people you know and these found people, like assembling relatives' lives versus strangers' lives?
I think part of it, I wouldn't deal with my own family. And I wouldn't for a number of reasons. Emotionally, I think it would be difficult. But also I think part of this is, again, rescuing these documents, right? And being able to think about who are the stories that aren't told. Who are these people? What can we know about them, think about them based on the way that they chose to represent their lives. So I like, on the one hand, the sense of mystery, the sense of distance, certainly. But I also don't know, like, hey, here's the story of my family, that people would necessarily care that much. And again, what I like, and I think Erin Anderson's work has really helped me with this, is, you know, as I talk about, you know, and I remember on Facebook I was like, oh, please let these people call me, I want to go in, and you know, a lot of people were kind of following the pictures that I was putting up or where this was going, and I really had that moment where I thought, all right, great, but it's over, they're all dead. What are you going to do? And it was Erin Anderson's work that really helped me think about, why does it have to be just tracing it back to somebody's report of what happened? What if we put these things into new trajectories of practice, into new arguments, give them new life? And that really helped me think about a way, another kind of merging between what they're representing, and it really helped that, you know, these are silent forms. If I'm collecting voices from contemporary times, to merge that together and to be very, very clear that it is a merging, and not something that, you know, this is their soundtrack. Complicated fact is I bought a huge collection belonging to a man who wasn't playing around technologically, but it was the first time I was able to look at somebody and hear their voice. So then it was kind of like, well, they're not silent media. What am I going to do with, you know, these voices and stuff? And I haven't worked with his collection a whole lot, primarily because I don't know what it is. He had high-tech equipment, and I've got family in the film business, and so I shared some of the work that I bought from this man, and they said, you know, Jody, this is really high-end stuff. And but as I'm watching it, I can't tell whether or not it's home movies or it's semi-professional, and so it was really interesting for me to question, like, well, how do I know that's a home movie? How do I know that that's not the beginning of some kind of amateur film project? So that has really made me kind of question the categories or the assumptions I'm making as a researcher about the original intent of these things or the design. Other questions?
You mentioned that some people consider your work too multimodal. To what extent do you consider your future viewer when creating them? Will they understand what you're trying to impart through your videos? Do you consider that when you create them, or do you feel more like that's...
Sure, I'm always aware of the audience, and part of it is wanting to know, and again, Csikszentmihalyi would say that flow zone, right? That the place to be is not to bore your readers or viewers or students, but not to be so different that it makes them anxious and they shut down, right? You want to get in that zone. And I think, I want to push people to think about research different, and certainly ways of representation in a different way, and if it bothers you, as long as you felt something. I think too much of our scholarship doesn't make people feel anything, because it's this idea, well, it made me think things. Well, how did it make you feel, right? I'm here to say, it's really quick and it's going to be over, right? Does this make you feel something, that you laugh? I mean, I love the fact, and I don't know why the hell Dorothy wrote that beautiful love letter, moo, like in the middle of it. I mean, it's hysterical. And so that's part of it, is that I want people to feel somewhat discentered, but I also want them to feel a range of emotions as they engage with the work. And I think, you know, that many fields, many disciplines in higher education, it's been about not feeling, because that's too squishy, that's too womanly, that's too unrigorous. And I'm thinking, I think that we don't have to have it be, you feel something or it's rigorous. I think that we can have more of a merging in what that scholarship, how it impacts us. And certainly, first and foremost, I want people to be moved to action, right? Think about what happens to your stuff. Think about the choices that you're making in representing your life, but also enlarge what counts as archives. Whose stories get told, whose stories. There's a great piece of work that I refer to in one of these pieces called As Yet Untitled by Max Dean. And I should get a picture, I'm not sure if I would be able to include it in the book, but it's this big contraption that basically, it's two hands, right? And there's a conveyor belt, and there are, a conveyor belt picks up a color image, brings it over, and puts it into a shredder. A single touch of the human hands stops that action and saves it, right? And I think it's such a wonderful piece of art and a wonderful metaphor for people to be more conscious about what do you save, why, and how, and what do you get rid of. Because we know now more than ever we can't save everything. But to be more thoughtful about what we are saving and the consequences of what we are getting rid of. And certainly, you know, I'll find that as I'm going through more and more, I'm less interested in slides. And negatives. They take so much work to reproduce. So I even find myself making those choices, like, yeah, I'll always go for the 8mm, 16mm films. But, you know, again and again, and it becomes, and you know, a question that I'm oftentimes asked is, what am I going to do with all this stuff? I have no idea. I can't imagine, I will never sell it. I can't imagine that I could ever throw it out. But at a certain point, I'm going to top out in terms of what I can have here. I think the I've heard that the Prelinger Archives is more interested in home movies and including that. But, you know, it does become that question of, you know, there's times where I go out and I see something that's in my price range and I'm like, shit, like more stuff, right? So, you know, I'm always making that, but I think just in terms of, you know, and then, you know, another question that I put to people, what would be in your 6 boxes? Right? And to think about that, I am understanding lives with a very, very partial, and I'm not even sure as I'm looking at things. What's remarkable is in Dorothy's collection of scrapbooks, oftentimes in scrapbook theory it goes according to this. And I don't think it's the case anymore with Instagram and everything else. But people were very selective about the moments they chose to represent for other people, because it was more costly than I think it is now with digital. You can photograph just about everything that you do, but at a time where, you know, it was more labor intensive and more cost intensive, people made different choices, I'm going to suggest. But also it tended to be that with that, you know, like your life isn't worth living if you're not representing it with a Polaroid film, right? If you're not capturing it. But what did people capture? It tended to be children growing up, but then happy, you know, graduations, anniversaries, stuff like that. And what was interesting about Dorothy's collection is the amount, in her scrapbooks, that she showed hurt bodies. Here's me with a broken arm. Here's with her infected foot. I mean, so it was like really weird. And amongst all this other happy, here's my gardening, and she liked to photograph their stuff. And in a way, it was kind of like, here's my bed of presents, and here's Fred's bed of presents. She liked to photograph her view from things. And part of this was that he was in the military, so they traveled places, and I think she would create these scrapbooks to show other people, this is what my world looked like. But also what catches